Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. Ever since King Kong tore up the town in 1933, New York City has played host to a number of giant monsters stomping their way down Fifth Avenue and giving colossal headaches to insurance companies. Tonight, we'll be paying homage to a trio of cinematic goliaths, all of which are celebrating significant anniversaries this year. The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which premiered in 1953, marks stop-motion legend Ray Harryhausen's first solo venture, and it was an astounding success. One that proved influential not only to its creator, who went on to such classics as The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts, and It Came From Beneath the Sea, but also to an entire subgenre of giant monster mashes to come, inspiring not only big bugs like Them and Tarantula, but also foreign frights, like Japan's Godzilla and other massive kaiju friends and foes. Speaking of the big G, 1998 saw its first Americanized iteration from the team of Roland, Emmerich and Dean Devlin, who had just enjoyed a huge success with Independence Day. While Godzilla made a ton of money at the turnstiles, the film was lambasted by critics and fans and has become something of a cautionary tale in the quarter century since its release. Finally, 15 years ago in 2008, producer J.J. Abrams and director Matt Reeves served up an inversion to the classic tropes of giant monster invasion movies with their found footage sensation Cloverfield, which took viewers out of the scientific laboratories and military boardrooms and put us on the very shaky and crumbling ground of Manhattan, under siege from a gigantic menace lurking just off screen. Tonight's episode is called NYC versus the Giant Monsters. I'm super excited to chat with my panel today, so I'm going to bring everybody in from all corners of the world. We have Daniel Ekholm coming in from Sweden. We have Darren Callahan over on the West Coast. And then Tim Palace and I ringing in from Chicago, Illinois, and we are here to discuss all three of these classic features, well, classic being a liberal term. Talking about Beast from 20,000 Fathoms from 1953, celebrating its 70th anniversary. Godzilla 98, celebrating its 25th anniversary. And Cloverfield from 2008, celebrating its 15th anniversary. Welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's dive in. A couple weeks ago, I was talking about King Kong, the original 1933 version, which is kind of the template for giant monster movies. But when we look at, we get into the 50s, and that's kind of when the giant monster movie movement really became a thing, starting with Beast from 20,000 Fathoms in 1953, because it kind of sets the template for what we come to understand as a giant monster movie. We have an explanation for the monster. We have scientists that are talking about, why this is happening and how can we combat it. And then, of course, we have scenes of destruction and lots of it. And I was talking about in King Kong, I'm like, New York always seems to get the worst of it. Like if a monster's going to attack the U.S., it's going to be, New York's going to take a beating. And the Beast was the one that got there first. Let's just go around really quick, like where you encountered the film for the first time, maybe how old you were and what your maybe initial impressions were. Daniel, do you mind if we go ahead and start with you?
Yeah, sure. I believe it was sometime in the early 90s. There was in Sweden there was a lot of Harryhausen movies airing at the time. So I saw a lot of Sinbad and Jason and the Argonauts and everything. And then I come across this masterpiece. And I remember that I really liked it as a kid, but I didn't really like it as much as Sinbad, and it wasn't in color, first of all.
Sure.
and second, it wasn't as imaginative as all the others. But then when I grew up, I saw it again, and I saw it with the other classic monster movie from Harryhausen, the 20 Million Miles from Earth.
Yep.
And I realized, wow, this is really good.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable considering, like the budget he was working with. It's his first solo effort after apprenticing under Willis O'Brien.
And then I realized it was really made before Godzilla even. So then I really started to appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, it inspired Godzilla. Godzilla, the Toho version, they wanted to do a stop motion, but they didn't have the budget for it, and that's where the idea of having the guy in the suit marching around amongst the miniatures came from. Darren, how about you?
Well, I actually hadn't seen the movie until preparation for this podcast, although I'd seen clips from it. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a chance I saw it on television as a kid at some point, but I had no recollection of it. The only way I really connected with this movie or was familiar with this movie was reading the Ray Bradbury Chronicles, Sam Weller's excellent book about Ray Bradbury, since the foghorn, the story, plays a part in this. And I know that Ray was very pleased with this film, particularly because he was 30 something when it came out, as a young writer with a first big film success that was right, up his alley.
Well, that's great. I'm glad we finally gave you an excuse to run it from start to finish.
Yeah.
And Tim, how about you?
Yeah, like Daniel, probably the 90s. I loved Clash of the Titans growing up, so that was probably my first Harryhausen and looking into that stuff. I did see it on the big screen probably about 5 years ago. There's an event in Chicago called the Sci-Fi Spectacular. So that was really cool. And then watched it again yesterday. So still holds up for me.
Yeah, I agree. I came to it like you, Daniel. I'd seen the Sinbads and things like that, and I knew about Beast kind of from a historical standpoint, but it wasn't one of my favorites. And I would say that that's probably still true. It's not one of my favorite Harryhausens, but I'm so impressed by what he was able to do. And especially when you consider, that he wasn't working with the same kind of budget that O'Brien was working with when he did King Kong or Mighty Joe Young, and certainly not the budgets that Harryhausen would come to enjoy. But he invented that process called dynamation, although it wasn't called dynamation at the time, but the idea of sandwiching, a foreground image on matte paintings and then having the animated feature having on here, and then having a background, either matte paintings or miniatures, and that allowed his animated figure to interact with the other film elements, and that made it very exciting. It made it a lot of fun. As I was mentioning earlier, like this film kind of sets the template for all the giant monster movies that are going to come in like 1950. 55, 56, and 57, they really just opened the floodgates because the drive-in market was huge. But this movie was inspired by, the 1952 reissue of King Kong, which actually made more money in 52 than it did in 1933 in its initial release. And that was what got people excited. But it was an independent feature. It wasn't produced by a studio. And that's all the more remarkable that, like they basically just scraped together the money to make this happen and then said, hey, Ray, we got this project. Would you be interested? Darren, you talked about the reference to Ray Bradbury's The Foghorn. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I can't really go super deep on it, but Ray Bradbury had a short story called The Foghorn that was, I think, first in the Saturday Evening Post. It was, I think, the genesis for the story itself of the film, although much of what happens in the film is not in the story. But I do remember the illustration in the Saturday Evening Post was really the image that grabbed the imagination. It was just a hand-drawn thing of this creature attacking the foghorn, the lighthouse with the foghorn, bright and tearing down its brick on that little peninsula. And I love that in this film, they basically completely copy that drawing into the one scene that's really from the foghorn, although it's probably film time wise only like 5 minutes or less. And then they sort of cobbled together some other ideas from the story into other elements of the plot. But really, the foghorn and that picture in particular, I can see where that would be inspiring.
It takes place in this lighthouse, and these two guys, and the old guy's telling the young guy the story of he hears a response out in the night that is not the foghorn. And basically, it's this dinosaur communicating with it thinks that the foghorn is one of it. It's one of another dinosaur. And so it keeps, calling out to it. And one night it finally decides it's going to come make a visit, and it realizes it's not another dinosaur. And so it, has its way with the lighthouse. And you see that little bit, but it's a much more kind of melancholy story in the original version, because the dinosaur tears this lighthouse down, and he's like, oh shit, I just lost my best friend, the only one who sounds like me in this world. This dinosaur, the Rhedosaurus, as it was dubbed, it's not a real dinosaur. It was something that Harryhausen invented. It doesn't have as much personality as his later creations, and certainly not as much as King Kong, which was the inspiration for it. It's basically just, it's a mean motor scooter on 4 feet with a whole lot of fangs in its mouth.
Yeah, you get a lot of empathy for King Kong and even Godzilla and other creatures. You get sort of a sense of a personality there. I wouldn't say that happened in Beast. It was a wrecking ball, that they basically had to control, and that's fine. I think at that time, special effects weren't really all that special, although Ray Harryhausen was at the top of his game. But maybe not the top of his game. He was definitely in the game. But, the innovation with the effects was, I'm sure, mind-blowing at the time. But I don't think there would be an audience member, unless they were extremely young, who really thought that creature was represented realistically. It really is, a part of the imagination to see it like that. King Kong, too, you can't ever watch King Kong and say, oh, I'm totally buying this, even, from that generation. But you can buy that personality. So you form a bond with King Kong and his plight in a way I don't really think you get with a Beast at all. I'm actually a little bit unsure why he was coming to New York, aside from to mate or something.
Well, he was following the Arctic flow. They were saying like he kept working his way down and ended up at New York, just because I don't know if that's accurate. Scientists pointed at map and did this, and I went, okay, great, I buy it.
They said that's where they had found fossils before too. So
right.
Yeah. All right. So maybe this is some sort of ingrained sort of trout spawning fisherman thing.
Yeah. It's in its DNA.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And the basic premise is that, like up in the Arctic Circle, they explode a bomb. They're testing up there, and that frees the beast from, its ice cavern or wherever it's been hiding out. I do like the fact that it does show up pretty quickly. Like you get dazzled by the beast, and then we have a whole lot of scientific talky talk, and there's a lot of talky talk in this one.
Yeah.
There's kind of 3 ways a monster has arrived in these films. Let me know if I'm missing one. but one is it's created, usually through some sort of man catalyst. The second is it's discovered, and usually in ice or the bottom of an ocean, because there's not many places to hide in the world anymore. And the third is it comes from another place, another planet or something. I can't really think of any other way, but I bet you most films, particularly those big monster films in the 50s, and even the other films we'll talk about today, they are coming from one of those 3 origin stories. This is a discovery of a creature that existed. There's nothing supernatural about it. It's just uncovered. And that works. That's cool. I did find the early part of the movie to be sort of Ed Wood-like, and I don't mean in terms of quality, but in terms of that scene in the film Ed Wood where Johnny Depp as Ed Wood says, I can make a whole movie out of this stock footage, because that's what I felt like it was like no one went to the Arctic to do anything. This was this is literally the same plane shot twice, and like a bunch of stock footage. I do wonder if you added up like the whole runtime of the movie, how much of it was just stock footage of military exercises and that kind of thing. I would say probably less than 10 minutes, but it felt like a lot.
Sure.
You know.
Well, I mean, that's lending the sense of authenticity to it. But again, speaking to the idea of this being kind of a template, I mean, we will see so much stock footage as we move into the 1950s and we see more and more of these monster movies. Like it's just to give that sense of verisimilitude that, hey, this is the army and we're running these tests. Really, look over here. Here's the footage of us doing it.
I was curious, Them is the very next year. Do you consider that a big monster movie?
Oh, for sure. And I think
big
that
ants,
is it. Yeah, that's a forerunner, or rather it's a forerunner of the big bug movement, but it's certainly inspired by this film. The idea of a giant monster running amok. And it's funny, Darren, that you nailed those 3 origin stories, because basically each one of the films we're discussing today is one of those.
True. Yeah, they're all from one slice of that pie.
When you're watching, our Rhedosaurus stomp around, like what are some of your favorite moments from the movie?
Oh, well, of course you have to mention the part when it moves between the buildings and you see the shadows on the monster. It's great. And then of course it is the part when it kills the police officer. you have to mention it, but just overall, it's just such a beautiful creature. It really is. So every time you see this monster, you just lean back and just appreciate what it looks like for me.
Yeah, the same. I don't miss personality too much in this movie. I like just seeing the monsters stomp around. I love when they first start shooting at it and it just goes through a building to the other side to get away from it. And just, yeah, everything just looks so cool when they got it. The lighthouse is iconic. Coney Island, it's all great for me.
I do like seeing Lee Van Cleef show up
Yeah.
as our sharpshooter, because like you're like, wait a second, like we will see him with a gun in his hand most of the rest of his career.
What's weird about the Lee Van Cleef thing? I wondered for a while if his voice was overdubbed or if he's just young. I looked up; he was probably in his 20s when he shot that. Literally shot that, and but his voice sounds so pure, almost angelic compared to the later Lee Van Cleef of Escape from New York and stuff.
Right. And really, if you think about it, you can have a sort of double feature with this one and Tarantula, because in the end, Clint Eastwood comes in a plane and kills the spider. Clint Lee Van Cleef double feature there before you watch the Dollar trilogy.
And then I really like, although I was talking with Tim yesterday as we were watching this, like the idea that they have to ride the roller coaster up to the top. I was like, because scaling the scaffolding, that's just unheard of. You couldn't possibly do that. And it might have been easier getting back down had you had that been your plan in the first place.
Well, actually the roller coaster thing I thought was a bit of brilliance because it really aids to the size. Like you're really, amongst buildings in New York, buildings of various sizes, you can see the floors and you're like, okay, it's about 15, 20 floors tall. But it really, I think universally for everybody, they know how big a wood roller coaster might be. To see it inside the maze of the roller coaster and then have them be at the top curvature, whatever you call it, being able there to have to shoot at it, I thought was pretty cool. People riding in a roller coaster car is a little dorky, to get up there, but that probably is the fastest way to get up there, I would imagine. But I like the fact that the climax was at the roller coaster, not in the city, because we've already seen the city, and it was introducing a new visual element there at the end in Coney Island that I thought was pretty cool. By the way, you mentioned the cop getting eaten, which I always think is a really big shock. I also mentioned the doctor in the diving bell. In these movies, there always seems to be the death of someone unexpected. I guess in Jurassic Park you have the lawyer, but they don't really do that as much in some later day big monster movies. But there must have been a minds blown if they reissued even King Kong. I went to see King Kong with my kids when they were young. They're now older, but we went to one of the fests, sort of like the Sci-Fi Spectacular in Chicago, and they were showing King Kong, and the kids were probably 9-ish when we saw it, and they were really shocked by the King Kong is climbing up a building. He's looking for Fay Ray. He looks in the window, and there's a similar looking woman. He grabs her out of the window, looks at her, is like, it's not her. And then he chucks her. And I'm like, the kids were like, oh my God. So I think with a cop, the same thing, where kids are probably like, cop's not going to get hurt. Cops are figures of authority. That's it. Whoa, he's gone. I think those kind of things probably really helps motivate the terror back in the day of those things.
Well, and I think it's such a violent death. Like you just, it's not like he stumps on him. He bites him and lifts him up off the ground by his head pretty much. And then like just kind of tosses him and gulps him down. I mean, it's a pretty violent death. And you're like, wow. Okay. So, I mean, and yeah, I agree. The death of our beloved, scientist, who's just such a charming figure throughout. And then for him, and the fact that he kind of dies, in wonder, he's down there just kind of like recognizing the awesomeness. And I think we've seen that in a few giant monster movies. Godzilla features, they absolutely have moments where, the scientist or whomever is kind of facing this awesome creature and is less terrified and more just kind of astonished by it and fascinated by it. And then, of course, meets its end, by it.
I'm surprised there's not a bigger scientific community involved. Usually in these monster films, there's 1-2 key scientists. You'd think the room would be filled with people curious about this phenomenon. You never really see that. There's always sort of
they didn't have the budget for that one. We had 4 or 5 people. That's about it.
They barely had budget for the romance story that's stapled in there. But yeah,
Eugene Lourie, this was the director. This was his first film that he'd done, and he would go on to direct a couple of other big monster movies, Gorgo and Giant Behemoth, which are basically Godzilla stories all over again. But he also worked as an art director. That's how he started his career, and he worked with Jean Renoir. But he also did some art directing in Hollywood. He did Clint Eastwood, Bronco Billy, and Shock Corridor for Samuel Fuller. That big dinosaur skeleton that we see, that had appeared most recently in Bringing Up Baby, the Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn comedy. But this film was made for like $200,000, so this is very much a low budget feature. And Jack Dietz and Hal E. Chester, who Hal E. Chester had played as like one of the Dead End kids, but they produced it independently, but then they sold it to Warner Brothers outright for like $400,000. They thought they were making a pretty good deal, but then the movie made like millions and millions of dollars, and they're like, shoot, maybe not the most savvy business decision we've ever made.
It's a good film, and he did a good job as a journeyman sort of director. I don't think it's really inspired or anything, but it's if you want to see a monster destroy New York, you definitely get the payoff. I mean, it shows you everything in full daylight with many people running and crowds just getting covered in bricks and buildings falling down, and that great scene of him running through a building to avoid getting shot at, which I would think the building would hurt worse than the bullets, but that's who cares? It's still great. So even King Kong, when he was running around, didn't really like level New York, where this, like the other 2 films we're going to speak about, really level New York. Yeah. So if you saw the poster, you actually got the poster. So kudos, good job.
King Kong climbed up the Empire State Building, which was relatively new at the time, and I think they made a wise decision in choosing another kind of iconic piece of New York that wasn't a skyscraper, that was something unique, and it does help kind of demonstrate the size of the beast, like it's as big as a roller coaster. So I like how they incorporate it, and it's very different. As you said, Darren, they've taken him out of that urban environment, and they're putting him out kind of in the open space. Let's move on to perhaps the most maligned of our 3, What's funny is like in getting people to come on the panel, I have the feeling that Godzilla 1998 was perhaps the biggest deterrent for a lot of people. They're like, I don't want to have to watch that again. I don't want to have to talk about it. But it is celebrating a 25th anniversary. And I do remember in 1998, it was a very big deal that this movie was coming out because, you know, Godzilla had been the sole property of Toho for years and years and years. And suddenly there was going to be an American version of it. Let me go the other way. Tim, what was your first experience with Godzilla 98?
Big deal for me. I was in 8th grade when it was coming out, and I had grown up a huge Godzilla fan. It's the first movie where I went to the theater by myself. I actually snuck out because I wasn't allowed to go that far. So, mom and dad, if you're watching, I was pretty disappointed when I actually did see it. Just not a Godzilla movie. I found myself watching it yesterday, trying to more than enjoy it, just make apologies for some of the stuff. Like the underwater scene. It's first time they really show Godzilla swimming underwater. So just trying to stay positive, but
Yep. Yeah. Well, don't worry. We'll get into it.
yeah.
Darren?
I had never seen it before. I had seen I'm actually, Aaron knows this, I'm not a deep Godzilla fan in the way that he and others are. I actually kind of came on board probably about 15 years ago because I had seen several of the key Godzilla movies, and I appreciate the aesthetic. They were on TV as a kid, but I didn't really watch them or understand them that much. This movie I hated. I've never seen
You're not
it.
alone.
Yeah, I've never seen it, and this was my first viewing of it. But I always have thought that Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin were hacks, and you know, I know this movie grew out of their hands a little bit, meaning the studio wanted more and more and more and kept giving them money to make it. And I feel that in the film where they probably just wanted to make a simpler film and it turned into a tentpole movie. But coming off Independence Day and Stargate, which I think are two horrendously bad films, this is no better. In fact, it's probably worse. I probably would think Independence Day was a freaking Casablanca compared to this movie. So I'm glad I actually saw it because I feel like that's one box I've never checked. But even in terms of my Godzilla films that I've seen, this is my least favorite. And you know, it wasn't completely without its charms. I don't think it's on the level of, let's say, Graffiti Bridge, the worst film I've ever seen. But it's bad. It's not a good film.
And Daniel?
Yeah, like Tim, I went to see it with my friends when I was back in high school, and we all thought it was a great movie. A great movie. It was the best movie I ever seen at the time. People have to realize that at the late 90s, movies weren't really that good. You had, like Darren said, you had Independence Day, you had Armageddon, you had Twister, and all these catastrophic movies, and everyone thought they were really, really good. But there was no comparison, so you thought that every movie was good because when in fact they were really, really bad in a way, and we didn't understand it until movies like Matrix came along and Lord of the Rings came along and everything like that. So at the time, I thought Godzilla was great, and especially the trailer when they are in a museum in New York, and you see this skeleton of the T-Rex, and then you see and they say, "Oh, the T-Rex is the biggest predator in the prehistoric world," and then you see the foot of Godzilla just crushing the Tyrannosaurus skeleton, and you thought, "Wow, this is great! This is." And then you realized a couple of years later that it wasn't really fantastic. It was a pile of crap.
You know, you mentioned Twister in those 90s films. As I was watching it for the first time, I was like, wow, you know, you think of movies as having the stink of the 80s on them or whatever. But now we're far enough away from the 90s. I could watch Godzilla and say, wow, this is so 90s. This is sort of like Twister or any of those other things. Where digital effects were really new, the effects didn't bother me. They looked actually okay. And but The idea of we're going to just have the effects because we figured out how to do the destruction of New York digitally. Here you go. They are missing like the reason we're watching pretty bad. But I have to say, you know, in those days, we didn't notice some of those things because like I think Jurassic Park has a really good story and builds suspense and interesting set pieces. But, you know, later they're just like, hey, they like those dinosaurs. They'll like this. And they weren't right. So,
well, this is among the Godzilla community, the G community. This is known as GINO, Gyno or Gino, Godzilla in name only. This is a film that I think its biggest, well, its first and among its biggest flaws is the fact that it's called Godzilla. Because people came in with expectations of what Godzilla is. We've been watching Godzilla at that point for, 30 odd years. And we knew what Godzilla was. We knew what we wanted from a Godzilla movie. And we were excited, I think, to see a big budget Godzilla where you could do all of those amazing effects and destruction and things like that. And this is not Godzilla. This is not Godzilla in the way that we've come to understand Godzilla. I think if you take the Godzilla name off of it and you called it something else, it's still not a good movie, but I think that would change people's perspective of it, is that they would say, oh, because it's a giant monster movie, it's bad, but it's not the egregious crime of calling itself Godzilla. I feel like that's the biggest thing it has going against it. I think you're probably right there, and that this film probably did start off. It feels like a film that can't figure out when to end. Like you've got Godzilla, and it's like, okay, well, shoot, we're only like 80 minutes in. We got to do something else. Okay, how about all the raptors from Jurassic Park? They like those, so we'll make a bunch of little Godzillas, and those can terrorize the film for a while. And then we'll knock those out, and then be like, oh, you know what? Let's bring that Godzilla back again. Anyway, we didn't ever really find him, right? It's okay.
Yeah, it's funny. Beast and this movie, they have a hard time finding Godzilla. I mean, finding the monster. Like they don't have like radar or sonar or something. I don't know what the technology was for Beast in that time, but Jesus Christ, can't they find this giant monster?
It's hard to imagine it hiding somewhere.
I know. Yeah. I mean, like maybe they do sell it's underground, and I know there's quite a network underneath New York. So I guess like with them, with the ants, they disappear into the LA viaducts and stuff. So maybe. So I guess that doesn't bother me as much. I tell you, one thing I did really like about this Godzilla movie, and I was surprised that it went on so long, was the entire movie is set in the rain. I thought that was really interesting, because that must have been a nightmare to make. First of all, it must have been thoroughly unpleasant for everybody involved, but it gave the film a very different look from the rubber suited Godzilla thing, because you could not do that kind of rain with somebody who's gonna, be wearing a costume. Where here, just torrential rain for the entire duration of the film. I had to admire its chutzpah for trying to go for that sort of visual.
It's easier to hide flaws, but I also imagine it brings in its own technical challenges. So yeah, I agree. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. The fact that it is raining throughout, and that clearly was a choice to make that happen. Also, apologies to our future generations for using up all the fresh water. Sorry about that.
Yeah, exactly.
I also like the creature design. It's not Godzilla, but Patrick Tatopoulos, who Matthew Broderick's character is named after, came up with I thought a really interesting design. And it's, as far as a giant monster goes, it's very agile. It is able to swim, and it does all of the things that this monster does. And you're like, I like the monster. It wasn't Godzilla. Godzilla stands upright, has spines, it breathes atomic breath. Like, we know what Godzilla is, and this is never that creature.
Did it bug you that the military was so inept?
The military is always inept in Godzilla movies, so I feel like that's almost like a callback to it. Daniel, had you seen a lot of Godzilla stuff prior to watching this one?
No, not really. I have seen the original one, and then I have seen some of the versus movies, especially from the 90s.
Okay.
And the thing that bothers me a lot is the time. It's around 218 minutes. It's the longest Godzilla movie of them all, I think. It's even longer than those new Warner Monsterverse movies. I like when the scientists and everyone sit around and talk in the classic movies that are around
90 minutes.
90 minutes. This is over 2 hours, and all they do is talk and talk and talk and talk. You don't really get to see that much of Godzilla in a way, and even movies like the Warner movies today that are really long, they have the sense that Godzilla is combating another monster. They understand that we come here to see the monster, but the 98 version here thinks in a way that we come to see Matthew Broderick, and the fact that we don't want to see that much of Matthew Broderick, to be honest. We want to see Godzilla.
Well, I think it's interesting that the casting, because that kind of tips its hand as to what film it's wanting to be. You know, when you cast Ferris Bueller as your main character, you know, it's hard to take anything seriously. You know, and I get the sense that this movie doesn't take anything that seriously. It's meant to be a popcorn movie. Like, you're not supposed to be invested on any emotional level. And these characters, like you said, I mean, there's attempts at comedy. But I find most of these characters just terrible to spend any time with. Audrey, like, I just could not care less about that character. And I feel like that's kind of the problem, is that we spend a lot of time with human characters that we couldn't care less about. We're not invested in.
I mean, Hank Azaria was the only guy
He's the only one. He's the only one.
And you know, that scene with the foot where he's between the toes and survives, that was the only good acting in the whole movie, where he's like, holy shit, you know, that was good. But the rest of it,
I really like Sean Reno, French agent. I wish the movie was about him instead. I think that would be more interesting. It's like, this is an American Godzilla, but we don't care about the American army or everything. We're gonna focus on this French agent,
right? And also, he's French. You know, like, it's not even like it's not even like Japanese. You know, like, we're gonna bring in this French element. I do wish Jean Reno had, like, you know, one or maybe 12 fewer reference to how bad the coffee is in America. It's like, okay, we got it.
Yeah, none of the jokes land. I mean, they were clearly attempting to do something. And matter of fact, there was a couple of like end of scene lines, you know, where normally there'd be some pithy, like, oh, you know, kind of like funny line. They were there, just not at all funny. They were all just dumb. And so it was sad. Hey, but I got to tell you, you know, I went to see the Godzilla 2014, the Gareth Edwards one, and I was a big fan of Monsters, his previous big monster movie. So he was a perfect choice for that. And, you know, the film's sort of average, but I love the general tone of it and the nature of it. I don't have any real complaints about Godzilla 2014. But I went and I was like, okay, the story is kind of thin. But then I thought, you know, Godzilla movies aren't really about the story. So why should I judge the 1998 one so harshly? It doesn't have a story either.
There doesn't need to be as much story as there is. Like, this should be shrunk down big time to like a 100-minute movie. I'm fine if you want to keep things going with the little raptor, you know, raptor versions of Godzilla, but we don't need as much of it as we get. And I think they misjudged their audience. I don't think the audience wants as much as they got. It's like, we already saw this. Like, we literally just saw The Lost World, Jurassic Park 2, like the previous year. It's like, you know, we're good.
And they look exactly the same. I also wondered, did they just reuse the same sort of code to like make these raptors? Because they are exactly the raptors of the Jurassic Park movies, except green or some not brown, you know, but they look and behave exactly the same.
And I mean, this feels very 90s now when you see like the phones and
Oh God, yeah, so small. It reminded me of that scene in Zoolander watching it when his phone is like this big.
Yeah,
And
it's
you
a
had-
it's a movie of its time in the way it's made, the way it's acted, the way it's delivered, the way it's animated, what it thinks we want, what the music is. Everything about it is a total flash of that year, 1998,
Yeah.
and not to its benefit.
and it's got those kind of Emmerich touchstones in that you've got the people outrunning waves and outrunning, like buildings crashing. It's like all the things that we would
Mhm.
come to recognize as kind of their trademarks. I did like, and I liked the reference to Jaws, where he's got the three fishing boats, and like those are the three barrels from Jaws, and they all get pulled under, and you're like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing there. But that's like the last bit of inspiration I think we see.
Speaking of those waves thing, I read an article when Terminator 4 or something came out, and it was so right. It said the problem is not that you're using CGI. It's the problem that no animator seems to understand physics. It was specifically talking about a guy falling off a motorbike and how that was animated. And it's like, people don't fall off motorbikes like that. They just don't. They don't bounce like they're in a Bugs Bunny cartoon. That doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
Guillermo del Toro made such a big deal about having like the movements and everything realistic in Pacific Rim,
Mm.
but I honestly don't think it added that much to the movie.
No, we'll do our own show about Pacific Rim sometime, because I have things to say about that movie too. I'm glad you mentioned the score, Darren, just because I know you're a composer, and it
P. Diddy.
it was paining me.
Yeah, it's awful. But the bombast, I think late 90s is the time when the scores became not really theme based. You didn't really care what was playing. It could have been library music, but they recorded their own score for it. It's just a lot of timpani and a lot of brass, but it's just like it could be from any movie at any time about anything. There are many movies like that where the score is irrelevant, and this felt like one of those things. As a matter of fact, I was watching a movie the other day. It was the Battle of the Bulge, the World War II movie. And I noticed in every battle, every action scene, except for the last one, there was no music. It was just tanks and rockets and stuff. And I was like, wow, that was a really bold choice. I wish in this movie they had let the sound design play out.
Let us jet forward to 2008 and talk about Cloverfield, which at the time I said is the best Godzilla movie set in America that we've had come along. And to Darren's point, like we've got the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which is uncovered. It's dinosaur that existed. It's just been extinct, more or less, or off the map. And then we have Godzilla, which is an irradiated iguana, basically, that grows to gigantic size. And then we have Cloverfield monster, which seems to have come from somewhere else. There's a lot of evidence that it came from outer space. But I love the fact that it kind of flips the conventions that we've come to see, because we see very much the same setup in Godzilla as we see from Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, where we've got the scientists trying to figure it out, got a bunch of heroes running around. How will we combat this giant menace? Whereas in Cloverfield, it's seen very much from the point of view of somebody who has nothing to do with the creature at all. It's just some people, some kids who are having a going away party, and they witness this destruction happening from a distance. And it's a distance that continues to close in on them. It gets closer and closer to them. And I really liked having those elements inverted. Tim, I'm gonna bounce back to you. When did you see Cloverfield, and what was your general takeaway when you first saw it?
I saw it in theaters when it came out, 2008. Promotion was really big for it, and you weren't sure exactly what you were going to go watch.
Right.
I had a pretty good feeling it was going to be a giant monster movie, so I was all for it. I'm not a huge fan of found footage, but I did like this movie a lot when it came out. I was pretty hyped about it.
Daniel?
Yeah, I think I saw it on DVD or something like that some time after it went on theaters. But as Tim, I'm not the biggest fan of found footage movies. But when I saw it the first time, I thought, this is kind of interesting. It's a different take on the monster movies with the people here, and I thought, well, this is pretty good. But then when I rewatch it now, because I thought to myself, yeah, well, there is some good things about it, but there are also a lot of problems with this movie.
Darren?
I was at Blockbuster, one of the last remaining Blockbusters probably, and they had this video DVD for $1. So I bought it. I had heard about it. I didn't see it in the theater, and I'm glad because I probably would have vomited, but because of the shaky cam. But on TV it worked. I have to say that I absolutely adored it then. I adore it now. The problem with the found footage is the problem I find in many found footage movies, where it reaches a point where you know that somebody in real life would have stopped filming.
Yeah.
And so the first hour, because I think the film's an hour and 20, I don't think it's a really long movie, but the first hour, I'm like, okay, he's filming it. The one character who's assigned the camera. The last 20, you're like, no freaking way is anybody filming this. So, and I find that happens in almost all found footage movies. So why should I judge this one worse? I find that about Blair Witch too. Like, why is somebody still filming? But I have to say, I adore the fact that it's on the ground with the people. I often thought about war films. You're always seeing it, up and down, but in different films and different perspectives. Like, why couldn't a monster movie be up and down, where you either see it all in the same, or they slice off, here's the infantryman's story, here's the general's story. I even love the fact that there's movies like The Big Short and Too Big to Fail, because those are almost complementary films. Too Big to Fail is set in the banks, what's happening in the banks during the Great Recession, and then The Big Short's what's happening in the field in different levels. So it was such a relief to see something from the perspective of people affected on the ground. And I have to say, when I first saw the movie and when I just saw the movie, I get so anxious watching it. Like, it just, I'm like, every time I watch it, I get kind of sweaty palms. And even though I know what's going to happen now after several viewings, I'm always impressed with how it kind of accelerates my heart rate a little bit, because they, like Aaron mentioned, they just keep closing the gap to the point where these individuals, it's unavoidable to not be damaged at this point. And to the movie's credit, they damage them. I love the performances too, which have to be sustained, hard to sustain that level. So.
Well, and I did see it in the theater, and one of the people I saw it with had to excuse themselves, and they almost made it to the bathroom, apparently. Yeah. Like you, Darren, my issue with the found footage, Blair Witch, I was able to justify for the most part because they were, quote, documentarians. And there's a sense in this film, and I think you're right, Darren, it's about the 1 hour mark, where it's somebody who's trying to document this. And he literally says, this is going to be important. People are going to want to know how this went down. And this is post 9/11, where we had all of that footage from people recording, the destruction from different angles. People who saw the planes hit the trade towers and saw the dust rolling down the street. And I think that was very much in people's minds, that it's like, we need to be able to document this so that we can tell the story. And so it made sense. Now, I don't know why he would need to continue filming as they're going up the stairs to rescue the girlfriend. It's kind of like, this doesn't need to be recorded, giant monster. Yes, that totally makes sense. Yeah. You going up the stairs, less so, but I like that they were using kind of like the night vision on the camera. I like the fact that, like there's enough reasons to still be filming that I was able to go along with it.
Like Paranormal Activity has sort of a all right about it, but at least they found innovative ways of getting cameras in. I often wonder if the film might have been maybe even slightly better had it not been a found footage. I don't know. It's so tactile for some reason. The one thing that really blows it is the sound design is incredibly good. If you ever hear this movie on headphones, it is mixed to the nines. And there's no way that on-camera mic is picking up that excellent mix. At the end of the day, it's a some minor beef because the film was thrilling.
Matt Reeves, who directed it, like this was one of his first efforts, and he would go on to do some really incredible work with the Planet of the Apes reboots and or a remake that has no business being as good as it is. The Let Me In remake of Let the Right One In. So I really, it was a nice way to see him get introduced. And I still don't know that Matt Reeves is necessarily a household name. I think we know his movies more than we know him.
Yeah, he did the Batman. That was his last one.
Oh, that was also him. See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I mean, he's not really like
they don't advertise him as from Matt Reeves, from visionary director Matt Reeves. Tim, what were some of your quibbles this time around?
This has the stench of TJ Miller all over it. I couldn't stand his commentary. Fun fact, I did go to high school with the lead, Michael Stahl David, too. So that was kind of weird revisiting. He is about 2 years older than me. I'd say if it was someone other than TJ Miller, probably I'm more on board. Like, why didn't he die and the brother is still alive? Michael Stahl Davids really doesn't seem that affected by his brother dying. So we could have it just be a friend. Creature design is really good still. I did like the little creature, like parasite things.
Yeah.
The mystery of the found footage, like what's going on, like when they first see a clearer shot of the monster on the TV in the department store, like stuff like that. I really like the characters themselves, like why do I care about these people? Going to rescue the girlfriend or the love interest. When you see that building though, and then the reed stuck through her, like you do think about like, man, that would be crazy. If, like there's probably a ton of people in that position in that building and stuff like that where you don't get in a lot of these monster movies. Overall, I can't say I'd want to watch it again anytime soon.
I won't put you on the spot to say whether you would go and rescue your own wife or girlfriend, but I was like, when I remember watching that and going, no, that's a bad idea going into that building.
As Tim said, I'm not a real fan of found footage, just because it's always, the camera is always shaking and I always get a headache. Also, as Tim said, you have to follow this group of people, and I like most of them, but I can't stand the cameraman. He's if he was my friend, I would leave his ass.
Yeah. Why was he invited to the party?
Before the party was over, I would kick his ass out. I really like this parasite. Like the other movies, you always have this second threat, if you will. In Godzilla, it was the kids. In Beast of the 20,000 Fathoms, it was in a way it had radioactive blood. You get radiation sickness, and in this part you have this virus or fleas or anything. And I like the part when you realize that this creature that are a really threat to us are insignificant to this big creature. It doesn't really even notice that they are there in a way. So I really like the sense of grandness in this monster. But I didn't really like that you get to see this monster just a little bit and you have to follow this annoying cameraman for all this time.
The ratio between annoying cameraman and monster is pretty disjointed.
Aaron, did you like TJ Miller in this? Because
you know what, I agree. I probably would not have invited him to my party, but I also could see, and I think this was a smart move on their part. I would have totally given him the camera. I'd be like, you get assigned to this, that way you don't bother any. Right. I don't have to hang out with you, and so suddenly he's become the de facto cameraman. I probably at some point, if I was like, well, if this needs to be documented, I'll document it because you're going to mess it up. Because,
yeah.
I must be the only person then who's on the side of TJ Miller. It was his first
team.
I'm on Team TJ. It's his first film, and he was a stand-up, and they're expecting him to bring the humor to it. I like that every character has sort of their own space, and his space is that. And
it's the comic relief.
the fact that he is sort of funny, is different than Godzilla '98, where they're trying to be funny,
Nobody's funny.
clearly not.
That
Oh,
Ebert and
Jesus. We didn't talk
Siskel,
about that.
come
but,
on.
that's lame. Yeah, some people in terrible situations, they try to make
that's
jokes.
Their default.
Yeah, and he feels like that guy, and he is given some very funny lines. As a matter of fact, I think he's a great intro to people who are not going to enjoy a monster film, particularly one that unexpectedly gets incredibly intense. That you're going to want to have somebody to follow who's sort of the jester of it. A lot of movies have this, even in I think it's Diary of the Dead. There's a funny guy in that too, and there could be worse than T.J. Miller is where I'm going with it.
I was going to say
no. So, but there's usually somebody who's got a sense of humor. I got to tell you though, even though he is injecting a tiny bit of humor, and my favorite line is when they turn that corner and the person who doesn't know what's going on, it's like, what's that? And he's like, something awful. And then they run down the stairs and there's another little creature. What's that? Something even more awful. And I'm like, you never know more than they do about what's going on, which is, I think, and so underused. And same thing with the marketing campaign behind this. Oh my God, there's so much jet fuel you get out of the marketing, the expectation, the drama itself, with just shutting the hell up about what the movie is and what it's going to reveal to you. And the same way with the characters, they can clearly see it's a monster wreaking havoc, but they have no context and they have nowhere to run and they have no idea how to handle themselves, even post 9/11, which when I saw it in 2009 or 8, I was like, this is too soon. Because when the one with all the papers falling down and the people on the street covered in dust, I'm like, that was my buddies, because I had buddies in Manhattan that day. So I felt like, whoa, this is too soon. Even now I feel it's too soon. Same way I respond when I see January 6th things where I'm like, I don't want to see this. This makes me mad. The idea of seeing that horror, real horror paralleled with New York's destruction when it really had already happened is such a different resonance than 1998's Godzilla.
I mean, they do make a reference to the World Trade Center bombing, and it's interesting to be like, oh, that's right. There was that other bombing, not the 9/11 bombing. But yeah, you're right, Dan. And what I like about the fact that we stay with these characters and we only get, the fact that they kind of have that interaction with the military to give a little bit more information, but they don't get a ton more. We get these glimpses of the monster, and it always feels justified when we see the monster. It doesn't feel like, nothing feels gratuitous about how we're going to allow you to see the monster. Like, I love that shot of them running down the stairwell and looking back up. Like, I feel like that is
just seeing the mouth. Yeah.
So great. And the one that does feel a little gratuitous is at the very end in Central Park, where it's like this giant monster sneaks up on him. I'm like, wait, like you never heard this guy coming?
Actually, I do think the last 10 minutes don't work. I don't know why or what I'd do differently as a writer filmmaker. But there's something about the last 10 minutes, although the wrapper of it being taped over another videotape, I think is gorgeous. The juxtaposition of the happiest day of those people's lives with the worst day is incredibly powerful. Plus, you get to see in the very last shot. I don't know if you guys saw this, the thing, but
you guys know what you know what we're talking about, right? Apparently the last shot, the Ferris wheel, you can see. I can't see it on my DVD. I'm like, I was looking for it. I went back and looked for it. I'm like, I don't see it.
I just watched the DVD last night and I didn't notice anything.
No, I saw it the first time.
Okay.
But something that I didn't really like is if you can only do this if you see it on the DVD or Blu-ray. Is in the end you hear after credits you can hear the monster scream, and if you reverse it, you can hear a background sound say, "Oh, it's still alive." Or something like that. I don't really like when you do that.
Yeah, I don't know how long that thing sat in the water before it decided to play.
Monster are in fact a newborn, or in a way.
Right, that's the other thing you did here.
It's just an angry baby.
Yeah.
That doesn't have any idea what's going on. You know, I do think though Ray Harryhausen would be pleased with Cloverfield if we could marry the two generations of films together. I think if Ray Harryhausen had delivered Beast and was like, wow, even up through Clash of the Titans, you know, that's up to the pinnacle of the art. And then digital, I think he would have been like with Godzilla 98. He would have been like, oh my God, what have I brought? But then he would see Cloverfield and he's like, okay, all right. Actually, if you do have the Blu-ray or disc of Cloverfield, the documentary is about how they made it.
Yeah. The making of is
Incredibly
pretty
good.
great.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned that it was a baby.
Yeah. The documentaries are cool because, I mean, really not much of that stuff is really there that they're interacting with. And maybe it's because it's a handheld lo-fi presentation, but they sold it.
Well, how much of it
It's
was
pretty
shot
impressive.
in LA versus how much of it is shot in New York? Like there's just a very, very minimal amount that's actually shot on location. But then, you know, like they managed to marry that footage so well.
I really do think they did an excellent job of making this world, marrying digital and analog technology, seem incredibly real, which I have to admire, particularly 15 years ago.
Well, and I think the running time really contributes to that as well. The fact that they keep it short and sweet.
Yeah.
And they don't. I think you're right, Darren. I think they could have cut out, you know, another 10 minutes, you know, or at least the last 5. Any final thoughts? New York City does take quite a hit in these movies, and it keeps on coming back. So I thought it was hilarious at the end of Godzilla 98 where, you know, New York basically cheers for itself. I was like, nice job.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, they mentioned the evacuation of the city in 98 version, like happening within 24 hours or something. I'm like, no way. And plus they don't mention the fact that how many buildings did they knock down in the first scene? I'm sure there's at least 1 million dead.
Yeah.
So it's they overlook that tragedy in the way Cloverfield doesn't. Cloverfield realistically says, if this was true, the city is wrecked. Which I admire their, you know, recognition that sort of massive destruction has a personal toll.
Well, thank you all so much. It's been a fun conversation, even though Darren just totally brought down the room. So, you know.
Well, Godzilla had nothing to do with any of this.
But looking forward to having you all back next year in 2024. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.